or whatever you'd want to call it, that I'm over here, transhumanism, Alcosan, and all this sort of, pushing the extreme boundaries of, the death of God to machines and all this, and it's like, wait, the mic, and a few weeks back we had a big power outage that did quite a number, and took a few days to get back, and obviously we can look at Texas and that whole debacle, which was not
God
very
does
fun.
that every once in a while to humble you.
Yep, and then we help them along with, hey, what if we put all those dead dinosaurs back in the air? Wouldn't that be fun? What could go wrong? Sure, it'll be fine. It's all natural, poison venom, all natural. It's all good. It's all good. Rock on. Well, Mister, or Doc, you're a Mister, correct?
Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm also just a Mister. We'll see if the doctor comes at some point, but he is not as of
Okay.
yet. We're still eating apples. Would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Bill Smith?
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm Bill Smith. I live in Duluth, Georgia. Grew up in the Atlanta area. Actually born in North Georgia, but grew up in the Atlanta
I
area.
didn't know
And so my education is in theology, minor in Greek, and Master of Divinity
that.
from Trinity Divinity School. And I live here in Duluth with my wife, Lisa. I have two daughters, one in the University of Georgia, the other who
Sweet.
just graduated from Wheaton College.
No way. That's where a
Yeah.
ton of my Do I have any cousins that work there? I might, but a ton of our family has gone there and just loves that whole area and that university in particular.
Yeah.
And
So
then,
I've known Walker for a number of years.
oh yeah,
We've had
very long time.
several really stimulating conversations.
Oh yes, I so enjoyed our last talk. I'm kind of sad that we didn't get to record it. Literally just so I could listen to it back. I just thought it was so. We covered some meaty things and went pretty in depth, and I just I love talking to you, Bill. You're a
Yeah.
damn good conversationalist with a whole lot of knowledge and
Oh,
wisdom. So
well, I should add, just to kind of sum up, is I'm the director of the C.S. Lewis Institute in Atlanta.
tiny details.
So I'm a lover of C.S. Lewis Institute, or C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
and also J.R. Tolkien.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I thought I had a well, I being a nerd, I have obviously many random. I have a magic cards and a phoenix statue and that sort of stuff. So I'm absolutely a fan of that sort of stuff. Um,
I
so
think I
let's.
was I think I was in my mid 30s when I asked C.S. Lewis into my heart.
I love it. I love it. That's great. Well, I think little backstory of like my relationship to C.S. Lewis is when we lived in Alpharetta before the second house fire, whatever. We had a little kind of like porch behind our house, and we had one CD, like just one of Creedence Clearwater Revival, which is
Oh, man.
whatever timeline. Yeah, kind of an old
Yeah.
bayou is where my head goes, kind of music. And I listened to that CD, I mean, on repeat one summer. I don't know, I mean, I might have been 10 or something like that. No, I was probably younger than, I don't know, somewhere in there. And I read the C.S. Lewis science fiction trilogy, which to this day is my favorite work of his, and
Hmm.
such a unique take on science fiction, which, me being a nerd in that sort of thing is one of my favorite genres, and his take on science fiction is novel. I don't know if nothing similar to it in that regard. Um, on that note, I think That Hideous Strength is one of the most prescient, kind of up there with like 1984, Brave New World, which I just love those books so much. I think it's just one of the most sort of accurate and rigorous considerations of what we need to be concerned about and thinking about for the future.
Hmm.
So the third book in the trilogy, and it covers subjects which I'm go on and on about, such as transhumanism, playing God, magic, which I also think is very relevant to discussions of number systems, which we won't get into unless we want to.
Well, one of the most fascinating things about the book is it touches on a subject that Lewis covers in a couple of other places. It's that the whole idea of the inner ring.
Yeah.
And how, Mark Studdard, one of the main characters, is drawn into working for NICE.
Mm-hmm. The nefarious organization.
Yeah, because of his desire to be part of the inner ring.
Yeah, to belong.
To be, on the cutting edge, kind of, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And that's one of the topics in that book that's covered in a couple of other his essays and that kind of thing. How do we get drawn in? Yeah.
I find some of the critiques of both sort of humanism and transhumanism in this context to be fascinating and instructive. Not necessarily as like this is an outright bad idea, but here are some problems that we need to address. And I think one of those is absolutely that desire to belong. I lost that. I don't really have that sense anymore. To make that funny, and for anybody who wants to do any psychoanalysis, take it away. I don't get lonely. I just don't get lonely. I don't know what that is. I don't know. Maybe it's a problem with me.
So maybe something broken.
Maybe something broken. Maybe something fixed is what I'm proposing.
Okay.
Is that sort of the symptom of loneliness is a bug. It's not something that is necessary. And I might even propose that part of the reason I have developed that feature, symptom, whatever, is through the Christian making, literally becoming a Christian, you find the voice of God to be your best friend. And then when that's taken away, well, there's no voice left but your own. And some psychologists would argue whatever, that the voice of God is just in your head. So not, regardless of the truth value of either of those situations, I do wonder if that is... I'm curious what C.S. Lewis would think about that kind of sort of the godless one, the one who sort of strives for this transhumanist dream, sort of remaking the world in a better image, which is a tall order. I'm aware, but not doing it out of some sort of ulterior motive, but sort of for a very pure motive of kind of like why not, but then also a bit actually in like a Kantian way, sort of the self as an ends, which I'm not a necessarily huge Kant fan. He did good work, but does that
all right, so
yeah, take it away.
One of the things that is true of pretty much just about any topic that Lewis would cover, whether it's anything from the use of alcohol to romantic love to relationships, anything, is this idea, and he got it from Augustine, of proper orders, the proper orders of and proportionality. So everything that's good, his argument about the devil is that the devil cannot create anything on his own. He can only distort what God has created. So all vices are virtues taken out of proportion. So he would say, in The Great Divorce, the woman who loves her son who dies, and now she can't move on because, she had an inordinate love for this son. So now her entire identity is shaped by the absence of this son who she had this inordinate love for.
Which is very, identity politics is consuming conversation as of late, which is kind of tragic because it's not interesting. But I do think that C.S. Lewis really nailed where it's like, no, don't have your identity in something vacuous or mutable, something that can change,
Yeah.
like a
Well, yeah,
sundial.
out of its, I mean, there's a proper proportion for, for everything, food, sex, everything has its proper place.
Hmm.
But if taken out of its, proper proportion, it becomes a vice.
So one,
The Bible talks about that as
sure,
idolatry. So,
sure. One, and this is based in mathematics, which does not mean it's not harebrained, but it is something that I have kind of wondered, and I think of you as somebody who might be able to tell me where I err. So, in the context of mathematics, there's something called a limit. It's just like very basic, non-fuzzy, this is like Calc 1 stuff, where you, as you approach the limit, if you actually, literally as like, let's say there's a wall, as you get closer and closer to that wall, once you get to the wall, you're there. And let's say the limit approach is 1. Once the limit sort of gets close enough, there's technically an infinitesimal amount left over, but the sort of truth value is that you're at 1. You're there. So my question is, and this is a legit question that I really don't know the answer to, is what is the difference between what Christ asked his followers to do, become as much like me and God as you can, and then secondly, Lucifer wanted to be like God, to be God, maybe a little bit more explicitly, and do those become the same thing? Does that make sense at the least?
so you're asking, are they actually the same goal?
Yes. Or do they have very different means? Like, I'm not
Hmm.
saying Satan's a nice
Yeah.
guy, but kind of with like a Descartes demon, like how can we trust what we know and this sort of thing, a
Hmm.
breakdown of knowledge. Then is it possible that both results, or sorry, both paths have the same end? Sort of, you could call that the finding of God, the becoming of God, whichever. Um,
Well, I would say that depends on what you think the end is. Um, so, you mentioned what Christ would say, or, Paul or whoever, becoming conformed to the image of Christ. So that certainly would be the devil's end, which is so in a in a universe where God is the creator, then the idea is that we're created with a certain end in mind, and that end, originally created in the image of God, and the story as it goes, we get off track, and the idea is to get us back, on that true journey and ultimately reach that end, which is to be conformed to the image of God in Christ. And so, as the story goes with the devil, he revolts against that, from the beginning. So his is Lewis calls the devil's state of mind as the anti-God state of mind. And so he is, rather than moving toward encouraging humanity toward the goal that God intends, he's actually encouraging him, tempting, the word, traditionally the word is temptation, tempting him away from that goal toward a self-centered goal, toward pride. That's why Lewis, sorry to bring Lewis into
no, I
everything,
mean,
but
I'm
Lewis
talking to
in
you. You think I don't want to talk
Humanity,
about Lewis? I love Lewis.
pride is the anti-God state of mind,
Hmm.
because it's a refusal to recognize God as the center
Hmm.
of things, and putting yourself or some goal that you've established as the center.
Hmm. So I think one thing that you lay out very nicely is that biblically, what I'm saying has no basis. I'm very well aware. What I'm kind of trying to attempt, because it's shown good results in the past, a lot of our greatest mathematicians were the best theologians and philosophers. Leibniz, I was going to say Kierkegaard, I don't think he did much math, but Leibniz and I'm sure many others. Those two is... I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's
Isaac
funny.
Newton.
Huh. I'm very curious to check that out now. But then, even Einstein, not so much a theologian, but he had fascinating thoughts on God and who is God, and obviously Hegel has a lot of trying to understand who God is, kind of in a secular context, and surprise, surprise, I love the Matrix and simulation theory, so is God just the programmer and these sorts of things. So I'm kind of hoping, just with the precedent of some great mathematicians, like, can we do not only maybe learn more about God, probably a good thing to do, but can we also maybe do some get to the root of some mathematics, and maybe I think it's very possible that argument in the calculus thing, where like these are the same, and it's like, are they though? And I guess that also brings up another kind of fun question of like which has a higher, I don't know, higher importance to us, philosophy or theology, which is it? Do you pick truth or God? Kind of is a not perfect analogy there, but I find an interesting question. So the reason I also think this is worth asking in the very Christian context is, and I'm rehashing this from a conversation I recorded recently, but we didn't really get into it as much, and I think you're more than capable, which is Job and Descartes' demon. I can expect that you know the Job story, but are you familiar with Descartes' demon?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, how do we know what's real? Could be all a facade, a simulation, sort of handed to us by a demon. And, at what point we're able to say, oh, we're outside of that context. It's not a demon. It is the word of God in a Christian context, an Islamic context, whichever. And, Descartes gave his own sort of argument for that, which I give him the allowance that he was scared of the Catholic Church, which I think is absolutely fair. Probably didn't want to lose his life. But I'm not entirely aware of a good sort of how do we get back to reality? How do we come to trust and to know that maybe there is an omniscient, omnipresent being, and he's trustworthy. That's what I quite literally am unaware of how we get to trust an entity with that level of power.
Mm-hmm. Whoa.
Yeah.
So, what did you say this conversation is for 3 hours? Or?
Oh, it's all, we're doing a 24-hour all-nighter.
Okay.
This is whiskey.
An all-nighter. Well, I forgot my coffee, so yeah.
We can talk for as long as you want. I have a set for an hour, but we can get wild.
Descartes, an interesting character.
Who is? Sorry?
Descartes.
Descartes, yeah. Funny nose.
Descartes was attempting to arrive at the sort of grounding of reality by denying everything that could be denied. He get alone by yourself and start, what's the only thing I can't deny, which is my own existence, because I'd have to exist to deny my own existence.
Which is something that doesn't exist would say.
What some would argue that some see Descartes as a, Descartes was a Catholic, remained a Catholic, so he was a theist. Some would see him as a good place to start. That he was grounding things, starting kind of from the ground up, and building a foundation, from the thing which is undeniable. Others would see that as actually where things went wrong, because um, it's trying to pretend as though that we're able to come to any kind of knowledge without assuming some things. That presupposition, you can't get anywhere without assuming some things, like assuming reality, assuming that our faculties of reason and the senses give us reliable information, not completely accurate always, but reliable information, without which science is not possible, knowledge is not possible at all.
Yeah.
And then as it relates to the issue, sort of from there relating to kind of theological issues, that then that's where you ask the question of using what's called abductive logic, which you would say, okay, in light of those things which we experience every day, what makes the most sense of
That's fair.
the world that
That's
I
fair.
experience? And it's not an inductive argument or deductive, but it's saying, okay, here are some things that, I mean, it makes sense to,
Sure.
these things are real,
Yeah.
that my senses.
Given the knowledge or estimated knowledge we have, this is the best
So
prediction.
then you
Sure.
work towards, you ask questions about things like, okay, why is there something rather than nothing? What makes sense
Antimatter.
of personal, relational nature? So you move to those kinds of questions and look at our moral nature. Why do we assume that some things are good and some things are not? And so that's the kind of approach that I would take. And Lewis did also to take that approach to say, well, it makes the most sense that we live in a personal universe because of what we experience of, and that, So that's the way I would go about it.
Sure.
And so you can look at positive reasons for why it makes sense to believe that there is a creator, and move from the creator to, ask is there evidence as to what this creator's nature is like? He'd have to be powerful. If he created a universe like we live in, he'd have to be eternal, or he would himself be created, and then you're into the, infinite regress of, okay, well, who created the creator?
Yeah.
So anyway, those are just some hints, about. I don't know if that's helpful.
Sure. And just to sort of steelman and add to your point, there's Gödel's Incompleteness theorem, the famous undoing of Bertrand Russell, where it's like, oh no, you can't get away from assumptions. And then of course there's a lot, but not all, of statistics, but particularly Bayes' theorem, where it's like, we have information, we have evidence, we're not stating it's perfect, but we're stating, kind of everything up front, and as sort of everything on the table as honestly as we can, and trying to make progress with that, which, me being a data scientist, I'm a massive fan. So it's
so
cool that those two align well, as far as I can tell.
Lewis followed Plato, and well, at this point maybe Aristotle, first principles.
Yes.
Things that you can't deny, or, well, I don't mean you can't in the sense that, I mean, to deny them puts you in a place to where all knowledge is up for grabs. So anyway, Descartes, he maybe he was trying to get away from accepting any tradition, and move behind tradition and come to just, sort of undeniable knowledge and build from there. And So some people would just say it's impossible to get beyond tradition. You accept some tradition as being reliable in order to get things going,
Sure.
and then and then you can question the. I guess you can say, you can ask, does do these traditions make the best sense out of
Hmm.
the reality that I experience? Something like
Sure.
that.
Hmm. And I think not a full solution to that, but an attempt to minimize that is sort of, let's get funky, let's explore, let's diversify, let's do all these sorts of things, um, kind of thing, prodigal son or something. I don't know. Um, so one thing, and one of the reasons I'm fascinated by this subject is not because, oh, let's rehash things other people have done. I'm proposing some new metaphysics. I'm proposing some new kind of ways of creation, I guess. Surprise, surprise, based in mathematics of a relatively new number system called surreal numbers, which I did not come up with. I did come up with unreal numbers. I don't know if we'll get there or if we want to. And I give you free reign to let's get off this at any point because it might be molasses and opaque. But surreal numbers are kind of the assumption that the most, this is kind of my take on it, but that the most powerful statement you can make is that you know nothing. The famous Socratic, I know that I know nothing. And the math, it's actually a statement of like not greater than or equal to, which is kind of the same thing. But it's fascinating to me that, like you mentioned, like Satan does not have the ability to create, and yet in this mathematical framework, which is like the most broad, encapsulates all other numbers, it is a kind of generative number system that's sort of like by making the statement that we have the smallest amount of knowledge possible, you're then able to make progress from there to literally everything else, kind of. Um, so, yeah, I just find that very perplexing, and I've known this for a few years, and I'm just kind of shocked and curious to talk to someone such as you who understands these things at a deep sort of like how we begin to do knowledge and where kind of creation is able to come from. And I know last time we talked, this idea of sort of creation from nothing seemed a little bit alchemical, a bit perhaps in the occult vein. I don't know. It's just math. But, it's not the first time that things have been, George Cantor, another guy who came up with the new number system, made this statement that, we've just sort of discovered more of God's creation. Whereas the church at the time and much of the scientific community was like, no, you're killing God's, our understanding of God, and you're sort of doing evil here. What place in theology do you think mathematics plays, if any?
Yeah, well, I think that um, mathematics. Uh, let's see if I can articulate this in a
Sure.
in a meaningful way. I think that mathematics is related to reality
Hmm.
uh, in um, and is reflective of God's creation. This is the way someone like Kepler or
Hmm.
Newton, would have looked at it. Um, I think it's fascinating to think about in outer space, for instance, how we can assume um, mathematical accuracy to the extent that we can send a spaceship around the moon, and because we know um, mathematically how the variables of gravity and such as that, and send the Apollo spaceship,
Hmm.
slingshot it around the moon and bring it back to Earth, which is amazing. And so all of the variables that enabled that to happen, we had to assume that those operated, the same in space, in the way that we knew they operated, consistently.
Sure.
We had to assume that those would operate in that way, and they did.
Hmm.
And so all of that would be connected with the creator and the intentionality of the creator and the sustaining of creation and the variables of creation that make mathematics,
Hmm.
possible. Um, so I would say that God is very central to understanding mathematics
Hmm.
and consistency, um, and yeah. So that's the way uh, the early modern scientists, again, like Kepler, Galileo,
Sure.
all who were all theists, they all assumed that the connection between science and mathematics, and that again that you could come up with these reliable conclusions because there was a creator, and his creation was acted in consistent ways, and it was connected mathematically, and so
Yeah, and I think that's the history of the great scientists who also happen to be theologians. I doubt, and this is not entirely a founded thought, but I doubt that those are coincidental. I feel that those perhaps are related. Just sort of big aspirations and a big desire to really understand the inner workings of the creation. Um,
yeah, I think the phrase that's often used was "think God's thoughts after Him." So the idea was, Kepler would use this kind of
that's
thing, was
fun.
that God had put um, these I was trying to think of the term. He had put these things for us to discover.
Little clues,
You know, yeah,
kind of thing.
for us to discover in
Hmm.
the creation itself. And so, and then he had given us a mind that was able to discover these, and our sense organs were given to us in such a way that they gave us reliable knowledge, connection with external world,
Hmm.
because those are all assumptions in order to do science, you
Sure.
have to have the assumption my
Got to start
senses
somewhere.
are accurate and my reason is operating correctly, and there's an external world out there.
Hmm.
But those are all assumptions that
Yeah.
you have, again, they're assumptions.
Yeah.
If you deny them, you can't prove them, because
Yeah.
then any research you would do
All
would
systems
be,
have some axioms.
yeah. So yeah.
One thing I'm again very curious about, and some people have been quite vocal about, some of which are me, others are um, Elon Musk, famously, what's outside the simulation, the Matrix, and we could think about this conversation about sort of evidence of a creator in a computer science context. We don't have to, but I guess what I wonder is how that idea of sort of getting outside of the confines, which I guess that's a bit of a dog whistle there, but sort of getting outside of the context is a better word, for mathematics, physics. I wonder. I don't think that was explored overly much in a lot of theology. That seems like a relatively, like, past, I don't know, 100-ish years to my knowledge, thought. I don't really know how to process it, to be honest, because it seems either heretical, or in like Cantor's case, it's viewed as heretical, but it's actually just new knowledge of God that we don't have yet. And I will say myself, as you're aware, I am not a Christian. I'm a deity skeptic. I don't know these gods. Maybe they're nice, maybe they're not. How do we tell? That's where I'm at. And some progress along this line of what does it mean to get outside of the creation? Some movements there could I think have a real impact on where a lot of, annoyingly didactic and scientifically inclined human beings might change their beliefs, I guess. I hope I said it as morosely as is possibly. Morosely? Thickly. High or low viscosity. Densely. Terribly. So, the church. I know you're not technically affiliated with any particular church, but C.S. Lewis is obviously a Christian, and there's a lot of interconnectedness there. I am worried about a lot of things happening in the world. Rather worried, rather concerned. There are things I think I can do. I'm working on them. Some of them I don't think I'm very well equipped to do, and I'm also currently just a single human. The church is a different story. They're not only well established, they have a lot of things they can agree on, and they have a fair bit of voting power in the U.S. and monetary backing, what have you. That being said, I am unaware, from what relatively little searching I've done, I'm unaware of kind of what impact is really even being attempted to remedy some of the deep problems we are seeing, such as climate collapse, artificial intelligence, transhumanism, decades of strength, and of course, the Chinese genocide of the Uyghur Muslims. And that is as a growing problem. So, I know you're not the spokesperson for the church. I'm not asking you to be, but I would love your sort of insight and just wisdom into not only like what is the situation with the church in the current global context, but then secondly is how do we potentially motivate or communicate to this group of people who's probably the most powerful group of people on planet Earth? Maybe? I don't think that's an obviously false statement. I don't know. Spiritually, most certainly.
Oh, well. Yeah, so we discussed this a little bit last time.
Yeah.
So we would probably need to define, okay, the church. You have individual Christians and you have different churches, that are, some of them that are, larger organizations like the Catholic Church, or, you can think about the Protestant Church, but then there are different, denominations within the Protestant Church, and then even individual Christians who within those churches would have different views on, secondary or tertiary issues, so that, you could have at the center, you could have agreement as to, things like, okay, who was Jesus? What did Jesus do? That kind of thing. And, these might be represented by the creeds, the ecumenical creeds, that kind of thing. But then when it comes to secondary things that are not necessary in order to be, actually be identified as a Christian,
Sure.
Political issues, issues,
But what about a genocide? I mean, I don't know if that's great. We're supposed to steward the natural world. That is not happening.
Yeah.
So I feel that these are things that...
Well, in that case, I think information, the place to start is information. And I would say that many Christians, I mean, if you're thinking about Christians, you got Christians in America, and then you got Christians, scattered. I mean, I've traveled to India, from India to Brazil, and there are many Christians throughout the world who are not, not even literate. So they go all the way from,
Fair point.
illiterate to, the most educated, at Oxford or Cambridge or wherever, whatever you consider to be the.
Yeah. Which
So, but
we don't mess with
you
that.
know, with information, I mean, that would be the place to start in
But
using
don't you think that a
whatever.
lot of people are well aware, and perhaps I will give them the benefit of the doubt, at least I'll pretend to, that it's the Holy Spirit telling them this is not their calling. Well, I'm telling them it's their goddamn calling, with all due respect. That, the problems in China, the problems in, coming out of the back end of your car, they are your problem. God is calling you to them, and perhaps in the Genghis Khan kind of way, where it's like, I am God's word come to tell you you've been living incorrectly with the sword. In this case, it's with fumes and, computers and things. Does that, obviously quite a heretical take on it, as you're well aware, but the church so easily, you have all the individuals sort of make the personal statement, oh, this isn't my calling. And of course, in history, we've seen people like William Wilberforce be like, no, this is my calling. And of course, the Holy Spirit could tap people on the shoulder. But perhaps we should have enough autonomy that we don't need to be pushed. That we can be rational, Christian, whatever belief, agents, and look at a problem and say, that's not right. I have the means, or I could gain the means and the knowledge and the know-how to address some of these things.
Well, so that's why I would say the answer to your question is would be a complex answer, because at some level there are some Christians who don't know, so it's information is
Sure.
and then there are some Christians who don't care,
Fair.
and
Fair.
that's a problem of sin, what the Bible would call sin. So Christians are also sinners.
Yep. Fun
You've
fact.
you've been around
Yep.
I've
been one. It didn't change
amen
nothing.
to that, huh? You say
Yeah.
amen to that. You've been around enough to know that's the
Yep.
case.
That is a feature.
And I would be like Lewis here when he was asked about screw tape letters, when someone said,
Such a
well,
good
you
book.
must have studied a lot
Goodness.
on the demonology and all, because you have a very or you studied psychology a lot. And he said, no, I just know myself.
Yep.
Uh,
That is
so
that.
anyway,
Everyone's like, Freud is bad because he psychoanalyzed himself. I'm like, I feel like that's why he's good in any way. Not that he's perfect. Too much on hot
so
dogs.
there are some people who don't know. There are some people who do know and don't care, and there are some people who, and then there are some people who are some Christians who are involved in in the big issues and are making a difference. So
Sure.
I know some of them personally, and I could name some of them, but so yeah, and probably, I would say probably the same is true with human nature across the board. Whatever worldview somebody has, their consistency, how consistently they live in line with what they claim they believe, varies from, person to person to some degree.
Yeah. Just makes me sad, just the amount of infighting that's going on. It's the Republicans versus the liberals. No, it's not, guys. Come on. Like, that is part of it. I'm not pretending that that's not entirely fake and based on nothing, but there do seem to be bigger fish to fry. And, much in the same way that, if you, somewhere in Romans, I believe it is, if you haven't heard the word of God, there's some amount of grace there when it comes to salvation and that sort of thing. Some people are quite literally illiterate, and maybe they're so sort of off the grid they are not even in danger of the coronavirus. But for people like, for instance, Peter Thiel, I know is a not only a Christian but also a billionaire, and also is to some extent throwing his weight at the problems we're facing, which I think is both admirable and, well, a little scary. He's on the board at Facebook, so it seems confusing. Let me see. Yeah. Fantasy, I find to be fascinating on so many different levels, psychologically, personally, just like like me, not so much like psychoanalyzing, but just as myself, and sort of what recharges and that sort of thing. And of course, C.S. Lewis was largely known for his fantasy works. I would guess mostly Chronicles of Narnia more than anything else. But I also wonder that the role of imagination and sort of the ability to kind of live in your own head, how important do you think that is? You're not a who's that guy? Gresham? The guy who influenced C.S. Lewis a lot. He had like an Irish accent. Who am I thinking of? He's a character in one of his books.
Chesterton?
Yes, G.K. Chesterton. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're not on that. You're not the head of that institution in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
What about C.S. Lewis? And is it? I guess I'm proposing far too much. But what about C.S. Lewis do you love so much, and how does like the fantasy aspects play into that, if at all?
So when you talk about, when you use a word like imagination, there
Maybe imaginary.
People mean different things by it. So Lewis thought, for some people think, when they think of imagination or that something is imaginary or whatever, they think, okay, it's something that's not true or that make believe, that kind of thing. What Lewis and Tolkien thought was that what the imagination enables you to do is to see truth from a different angle. So it's not untethered from truth. It's just using God-given faculty in order to create a situation, a world, a story, something like that gives you an angle on something that really is true. So, for instance, in Lord of the Rings, you would have characters in Lord of the Rings demonstrating certain virtues, and by sub-creators, Tolkien called us as human beings sub-creators. We weren't original creators, but we took what God had given us, and we could now create our own stories, our own worlds that demonstrated and connected some way with the real world. And so Lewis, he took that, and when he had a big struggle having been an atheist, and then he moved incrementally he became a theist, and then he had this big struggle, and his struggle was, he said he read all these stories of Norse mythology and Greek mythology and such, and he loved these stories, and they seemed to connect with his heart. And then he had this, he had the rational or reasonable, and he said, it was like he had two different minds. And Tolkien said to him, and this is kind of what
I forgot they were in their little book club. What was it called?
The Inklings?
The Inklings, yeah, the bar they'd meet at. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
continue.
well Tolkien said to him, hey, Christ is the true myth. So these mythic stories that you read that connect with your heart in some way because they're illustrations of something that's true about reality. Well, the Gospels are the true myth. They are myth become fact. So they bring together the history and myth come together in the person of Christ, and that's what Lewis, it was like an aha moment, and that's what eventually led to him, becoming a Orthodox Christian.
I don't think I knew that. So not only like did he become perhaps the best of all time, sorry Jesus, get your parables out of here, but Chronicles of Narnia are really good. Not only did he become kind of the best at that, but that was sort of what brought him there. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. He had
Wow.
when Tolkien shared that with him, along with another professor at Oxford, Hugo Dyson, and they were having this conversation late at night, and they took a walk on Oxford. It was called Addison's Walk, and they were up till late in 2, 3 o'clock in the morning discussing these things. And this was, like I said, this was a major turning point where he saw, sort of metaphorical, the right and left hemisphere of your brain, coming together. And he saw where, again, the imaginary and the factual could come together in the incarnation, what he called the not last miracle, the
inciting.
I'll think of it in a minute.
Catalyzing something.
Yeah.
That reminds me of just that idea of sort of like the synthesizing two sort of modes of thinking. I rant about this a lot because I think it's very important. But Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky are two Nobel Prize winning psychologists, which is a shocker. And their theory, which they really proved and bolstered with a lot of experimental evidence really showing that no, this is actually a thing, is that we as humans have two modes of thinking, and one is kind of more mathematical. It's in steps. It's very concrete. It's very conscious, and then the other one's kind of it's automatic. It's you're unconscious and all that sort of stuff. And I feel that that kind of from an acting, like as you know, I've done some acting in the past. I find that like getting those two together, for instance, like you can have a Christian where it's all just knowledge, it's all just facts, it's all just rote memorization and and then I think Lewis said this, it's kind of like faith and works. It's not only a belief, it's also the enacting of those beliefs. I don't know how related that is, but not only do you have sort of the emotional, mental understanding and sort of like literally unconscious belief and faith and confidence and all that, but it's also you got some meat on those theological bones.
Yeah,
perhaps.
Yeah. This is why the myth, or well, let me say it this way. This is why the truth, you have John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So the Word, the Logos in Greek, had to take on flesh because reality, it wasn't just a thought. It wasn't just the Logos, just wasn't a thought. The Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. And that's why Christ, for him, is the secret revealed. He took on flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten, grace and truth. That kind of thing. So, so the interesting thing there in John 1 is also that in the beginning, of course, that's the phrase that goes back to Genesis 1:1. So the creation and redemption are
a bit of foreshadowing
together in the person, in the demonstration of who God is in the person of Christ.
That's fascinating. I wish there was more of that. Like I actually think Christianity, as not only like the literal Bible, but also in churches and these things, I think pastors do a pretty good job, and obviously Lewis does as well, as using both of those, both like rigorous factual based evidence and also narratives and stories and emotional things. Those are part of thought to great effect.
I'll give you another illustration. One of Lewis's first book that he wrote after he became a fully confessed, Orthodox Christian, called Pilgrim's Regress.
Huh.
And in the story, it's a story. Pilgrim's Progress. This is Pilgrim's Regress or return. Because he's returning to that kind of thing. So anyway, he the way he tells the story is that there's a road that cuts down the middle of a territory, and on one side is romanticism, and that's the kind of the heart and story, the myth, that kind of thing. And on the other side is rationalism, and that's the factual, scientific, that kind of thing. Well, he says Christianity cuts the road right down the middle between those two. And
definitely the funnest road.
Christians are oftentimes veering off the road on one side or the other. Martin Luther said it this way. He said,
I sure do.
The church is often like a drunk peasant trying to mount a horse. We try to correct a mistake we made only to fall off the other side of the horse and then fall off.
Curse you, binary search. For any nerds out there, that's funny. Yeah, it is a back and forth process at the minimum, isn't it? Yeah, I'm so interested to see the future of all that, especially as our as our media, right? Like, and it depends on the book, right? I think for instance, the Chronicles of Narnia movies are fantastic, but I think the books are better. Whereas for Lord of the Rings, the movies might be better than the book. It's close, but the movies are so good that it's kind of a toss-up. And I'm hopeful for things like augmented reality and maybe virtual reality, and then of course like brain-computer interfaces, which we already did the Descartes demon thing. We won't do it again. But I'm hopeful that our ability to tell these sorts of great narratives goes on. And
story. I think that part of the what catches us again with story is that narrative is this is consistent with who we are as human beings. I mean, you have a story, which is made up of the experiences of your life. So if you and I meet and I say, hey, you tell me your name, and then I say, okay, so now tell me the story that connects with that name. And
I have no idea, honestly.
That's how to identify. I mean, you tell me about your family, and
I just mean like, what does Walker mean? I'm like, I don't know.
I don't believe this. And I went to that kind of thing. And so we're storied beings. We're personal storied beings, and we're not just facts. We're not just data. It's how the events connect with each other that shapes our identity, and so that's part of the personal nature of who we are. That's why God has a story, and that's really what the Bible is telling us. Is it's made up. The overall narrative is a story of what God wants us to know about Himself, and that story is focused principally. The climax of the story is in the incarnation, when the Word becomes flesh and dwells among us, and we beheld the glory of God, in the person of Christ.
I can't get out of my mind two stories. One of which is literally a math novelette. So it's technically a novel, but it's the surreal numbers thing told from a couple on the beach discovering this number system. Where obviously it didn't start as a story, but it was converted into a story, I guess you could say. And then the second is sort of Berserk, which is technically it's a manga, which is very feels odd to compare that to something like a Bible or Quran or what have you. But it's another sort of grandiose tale with larger than life characters that lays out a philosophy, a theology, if you're really, really wild. but I'm struggling to think of any sort of, vigorous belief system, ideology that lacks a story. That seems almost like an incongruous thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Quran, for instance, is not a narrative. It's a it's a it's a group of oracles. So it's not. I mean, there are oracles in the Bible. God is
Sure.
saying this or saying that, but the Quran does not have anything like the Gospels, for instance. It's basically recitations of oracles that were given to Muhammad by, to deliver, and like the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, never claims to be, and there might be a Hindu somewhere who believes, but most, at least educated Hindus, would say whether anything related to these stories ever happened or not is irrelevant. Okay, so, but that's not the case with Christ. This is claiming to be actual events, that took place. And that's because, again, the Creator is entering history. And so history is important to the Christian, where in other religions, to some degree, of course, in Judaism it is.
Very related.
In Islam, you have not only the Quran, but you also have the hadiths,
sure,
which tell stories of Muhammad's life.
And I guess my main point is that there are some, even the entire Bible, it's got some poetry in there and other fun tidbits. Whatever Revelation is, I don't know. But there are some sort of central, if nothing else, just literally the story of Muhammad in Mecca. I do not pretend to be a scholar on Islam, although I honestly would love to be.
Well, hey, let me ask you a question.
By all means.
What? Tell me what you think numbers are.
So, the way I think about them, and this gets to the unreal number system, which is a little harebrained, but that they're interacting with a reality. Not reality in a strong context, but they are measurement. And if you're like, what the hell are you talking about? I did a video on my opinion of metaphysics. Check it out. Where it's, we can get close to, sort of an atom, a monadic, fundamental thing. I don't think we'll ever get there. But even if we could, that is interfacing with something outside of ourselves. And something that is, as far as I'm unaware, fundamentally unknowable, untrustable, unverifiable, axiomatic, this sort of thing. So
would you say that numbers exist?
I would say we are currently unable to determine whether or not Platonism, Ayn Rand, Christianity, I don't think we have the tools. It's possible the tools do not exist to be able to do that. But my point is kind of that even that if we could verify there are numbers, this, that, and the other, you're unable to, or we're currently we don't know if there's a way to escape the kind of eternal recurrence in a different sense. Sort of there's always something outside of that that's acting kind of as a Descartes' demon, which could be seen as a bad thing, but it could also be phrased as, and I would phrase it as, all things are possible. Doesn't mean they're likely, but we are unable to prove that anything is impossible because we kind of can't prove anything, so all things are possible, which was actually the first thought I had when I became a born-again Christian. It was like, oh, everything's possible. Well, that's nice.
That was a bad mistake you made.
What?
Not becoming a Christian, but thinking that all things are possible, because there's some things even God can't do.
Well, I disagree.
Well,
I think his God is too small.
God cannot, the Bible tells us, friends, that God cannot lie. So, I mean, if you're a Christian, you believe that much anyway. But I would also say God cannot make a square circle.
That remains to be seen. I think we should question these assumptions as well, and view that this lack of knowledge is actually perhaps the most generative and powerful statement that can be made. And I, for the videos discussing these ideas, I have that symbol, the not greater than or equal to, just supposed to look a little bit like, ooh, is it a cult? Whatever. It's not. It's just numbers. But just sort of that idea of like, whoa, this is a new understanding of reality that is really, I believe, mostly relevant for artificial intelligence and this sort of thing. But I'm hoping it has a lot of... I hope I would like to be friends with God. I do not want to be God's slave. Not a huge fan of that one, but I'm totally down, whether that be Allah or he's an elephant, what have you. Totally down for that to be a friend. I don't want that. I don't want to be a slave. I'm not a... I know he's a good master, regardless. That is my current, not very intelligent, not very well informed Christian view.
Well, the reason I asked about numbers is
Sure.
The answer to that can be pretty significant because
Yes, quite.
I worded that specifically like, do numbers exist? And you use the word measurements.
Certainly.
And that would, the reason it's important is because I would say numbers can't do anything.
Sure.
Okay, so they don't.
But then we get to the question of what are doing things, such as a person, what are they made of? They're made of things that you could consider numbers. So a collection of numbers is able to do things. It's hard to do anything with the empty set, but the empty set and zero do a whole hell of a lot.
See, I like your statement. They're measurements. They're measurements of something else. They're not. They don't have any existence in themselves. So I would say that numbers exist. I'm not a Platonist. There are some Christian Platonists, but I would say that numbers exist in the mind of God.
Okay. I was like, how do you get out of that one?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And in the same way, okay, if you thought that one was potentially...
this is delightful.
I don't think that
Pour me another.
laws of nature can do anything.
Such as things only happen due to, it starts with a P and then an R. It's not Protestantism, it's... What is when God does things in the world and it starts with a PR? What's it called? Bill, what's it called?
I can't.
Oh, it's going to bug me.
Maybe next...
Providence! It's Providence! Oh,
Providence,
I messed with my mic.
Maybe our next...
That's funny.
Maybe our next talk we can get into that one. That would
Sure.
take us maybe a little
Sure.
feel. But
So,
it is important because I think when about numbers, for instance, because some people try to use mathematics to create something, but numbers have no power within them. This is what numbers have no power to do anything. So, like, I got a drawer in my desk here. If I put $100 in my desk, and I come back 2 weeks later,
Warren Buffett has entered the chat.
there won't be $600 in there unless somebody else has come and put money in there, or
you thought the stock market was real.
Yeah. Numbers are measurements of things, and they have no power within themselves. And so, people mathematically who say somehow that try to come up with some mathematical equation, that creates something.
I guess my point about measurement is that we're measuring something, and we call it, like as in language, we call it a number, we call it a measurement, what have you. But we don't actually, numbers can't do anything. Oops, sorry. we're measuring something unknown. So to say that numbers, this thing that we don't know what it is and we're calling it a number, so saying something we don't know anything really about can't do anything seems to me to be a very difficult, perhaps impossible argument to make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would just say, show me how a number can do anything.
And my response would be, show me how we can't. Goodness, this is such word soup. But basically, we can't prove that it is unable to. Like it could. We've never seen it do that. For instance, we've never seen a square circle, but I don't know.
Well,
stranger things have probably not happened. But
if you define what a square is and what a circle is, then by definition they're impossible. So
in certain contexts, and that context breaking is what I find so fascinating. For instance, like in 2 dimensions, you're certainly correct, but in 3 dimensions, all of a sudden you can have a bended square. It is still a square, but now it is round. So
no, I would say if it's a square and it's now become round, it's no longer a square.
In like a projective geometry.
So you'd have to say that it's a square from one perspective.
Exactly, from one dimension.
Okay, but that's not a square becoming a circle. That's some kind of object that, looked at from one perspective or one angle, is a circle, and at another angle is a square. It's not a square becoming a circle.
Sure, but it does exist. This is an object that you could literally create, and it does exist. And it doesn't necessarily, its existence doesn't depend on your perspective. Obviously, your knowledge of the object does.
Right.
Maybe this is just semantic. My main thing is that we don't know what we don't know, and that's actually a very powerful, and I would propose motivating thing. And we could go to the George Hotz hack, jailbreak the universe direction, which I think could be fun. To go to other universes and to other planets like Paralandra, like the other one, I guess just Venus, I think would be really cool. I would like to go to the Shire, and I don't just mean New Zealand. So to me, this sort of math direction is at the minimum fun, and at the maximum heretical, but hopefully just good for thought and artificial intelligence.
It's all pretend, though. It has no scientific. There's no scientific proof of it, other than what could be.
If you'd like to read the book, there's an entire, very in-depth mathematical proof for surreal numbers. It is very dense. But again, everything's built on axioms. Godless incompleteness theorem. So to the extent that nothing is scientific, this also falls into that category. But also to the extent that anything is mathematically founded, this is. Don Knuth, John Conway, 2 of the best mathematicians of all time, put that stuff together.
There's an old saying that you probably run across before that you may or may not like.
Go for it.
That mathematicians make terrible philosophers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I could not agree more. And that's why I find like that sort of, conflict such a generative one, to where you have someone like Descartes trying to, cardinal numbers and George Cantor, he lost his mind. Maybe for other reasons, but I don't think that's I think that conflict between philosophy and mathematics and maybe theology is dangerous, as you would say.
Well, there are plenty of mathematicians who are theists and who are Christians, and they don't see any tension between the two. John Lennox, that's one person.
He's a spicy meatball.
I recommend his book. I was just reading today, AI and Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. And in that book, he mentions several. He himself is a mathematician at Oxford and Cambridge,
Hmm.
but he mentions several mathematicians who are um, skeptical of AI and
Horrified.
uh,
Fair. Yeah.
so it's a controversial how I mean skeptical in the sense not that AI has practical
Sure.
uh,
But it is the
use
not only
and
death but also the
but how
killing
far
of
can
God.
what can
Yeah.
it actually do? You know,
Probably anything.
and so, but anyway,
Hmm.
well, hey, what I wanted to, I know we're
We're at about time.
tracking
Yes.
along. Time flies when you're having a good
That
time.
it does. That it
Uh,
does. Yeah. I
is there
love
is there
this.
any other have you gotten through all the questions that you wanted to
I've got
discuss?
one last one, which
Uh,
is a lot to get into, so we'll keep it brief. But especially in light of artificial intelligence and how do we sort of even begin to talk and think about these things. Uh, I think the one, everyone's over here talking about consciousness. I don't think consciousness really matters. That's for another time. We can get into it. But the soul is something many people have a reservation about. C.S. Lewis famously, I have a body. I am not my body. I am a soul. Paraphrasing poorly. Um, I see no. Well, okay, many things. One, I don't personally find the soul to be a meaningful term. It's sort of a word that's used kind of as like the plus C in math, where it's sort of like we don't really know what this is, but it's there. We kind of have to mention that there are things we're not certain of, so we'll call them the soul, and we'll just let them be fuzzy over there. There's a whole lot of people who are going to be very against AI if we can't do some more rigorous discussion on what we mean by soul and perhaps spirit, in particularly, you're a human, and then we like up your load your mind, and you leave your body, and now you're in a computer or a robot or something like that. Does your soul go with you? I would think so, but if someone's like, "What do you mean by soul?" I'm like, "What do you mean by soul?" I don't. It seems like a word with no meaning. So basically, I think it's very important that we sort of get to the bottom of what is meant by the soul and sort of what happens to it when all your neurons, the weights of those neurons, get moved somewhere else. Any
so,
thoughts?
are you asking me what I think a soul is?
Yeah, as rigorously as you care to delve into.
Um, well,
It's very hot in
okay,
this
so
room.
maybe can start from kind of simple, um, and maybe we'll pick this up on another discussion.
Sure.
Um,
And I should probably do more research on this subject. I
so
have not
I would
in a while.
say that, and in you probably know this in the Christian community, there are uh, there's discussions about the relationship of the body and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Descartes sort of had a weird,
Hmm.
everything comes back to Descartes.
I love it. I'm down with
No,
that.
but that there is sort of like anyway, I would say that the range now in the discussion is between, okay, is the soul a separate uh, something
Hmm.
that exists, that it basically um, has the consciousness, the memories, the all of that is part of who we are,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that is a separate and that's more what I think Lewis is more in that train of thinking, which is
Hmm.
probably some people would argue more moving towards say Platonic or Greek,
Sure.
thinking. Even when you get to Plato, you get a little bit of that the um, soul is trapped in the. I don't know if that's
Mm-hmm.
the right word.
Oh, I love
The final
good
state is
stuff.
one where the soul is
Mm-hmm.
freed from the body, and
We're
that kind of
free
thing.
from sexual desires.
The Hebrew concept is much more holistic, in
Hmm.
that the body is the person is the integration of the body and soul or spirit.
Mm-hmm.
In that, so what happens is the two of those together, the mind, the non-physical parts of us wedded with, produces something that transcends just the physical.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, and so that's why Jesus is raised in a body. Okay. The final state that we will have is
Huh.
not of a soul floating around, in the clouds or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
we'll have a resurrected body that God will reconstitute our body out of His power, that kind of thing. So I would say that the the ideal state of us as human beings is to be embodied, uh, but it is possible for us to exist in some state, um, which the Bible would call the soul or spirit, which exists with the conscious mind, um, the memories, that kind of thing that can exist. Um, how that exists, I don't know exactly,
Mm-hmm.
but um, you could talk about, okay, so what's the, and then outside of the Bible making that claim, what is the evidence for that, and there I can we could go into
Hmm.
near death experiences and that kind of thing where I could tell you some pretty amazing stories.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. So yeah. So I would say there's some kind of existence that transcends the human body that consists of our consciousness, our memories, so that me as Bill Smith remembers, my experiences
Hmm.
here on Earth, relationships that I had, my relationship with God, all that kind of stuff that transcends the death of my physical body.
Hmm.
Um, but the ideal situation is, and the one that God intends to be the ultimate expression of our humanity, is for us to be embodied.
So, a kind of follow up question to that is, um, or let me just explain briefly. I think briefly, kind of what I expect the soul means, and you tell me where I'm probably wrong. Um, Basically, you have the person, a physical meat, organic thing, where if something goes wrong in the brain, it can affect the personality. It can affect um, you deeply into like what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Famous story, Phineas Gage, if you're interested. Um, he had a railroad spike go through his head. Didn't die, but his personality totally changed. Whereas his soul, I would guess, is sort of like his Platonic name or something like that. Sort of like it's the essence, you could say, of his soul, and it kind of has perhaps a status, like a binary, like saved, unsaved kind of thing. But it has, other than just like, oh, this is, his name or index. It doesn't physically manifest in any way. Um, how correct or not correct is that in your estimation?
Yeah, as I said, I think it has some kind of existence that transcends a physical, physical. Um, yeah,
Okay.
it's so the person is not limited to the to their physical body, but um, but it's an integral part of who we are.
Gotcha.
It's not like a secondary thing that we're trying to, get out of, because that's why death in the Bible
Hmm.
is an enemy. It's not looked at as, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, "Oh death, where's your victory? Oh grave, where's your sting?"
Sure.
And he's talking about when we receive the final um, inheritance for what Christ has purchased for us. And so he says it will be said then, "Oh, uh, you know, grave, where's your victory? Oh,
Yeah.
death, where's your sting?" And so we weep, he says, as Christians, but not like those who have no hope, because we recognize that um, uh, there will be the final bringing together of the two again. Um, in God will create a new body for us. It's not like He'll dig it up. You
Yeah.
know, like
Gross. What are we,
but
necromancers?
yeah,
They're
in the
OP.
same way that He's able, that He created before, He's going to create a new, a new body for us. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, yeah, I think what you're describing, there's some kind of existence of consciousness, a spiritual, for lack of a better term, I'll call it spiritual consciousness, that enables me to retain the memories that I have, and the mind that transcends the brain. And
Gotcha.
because I think also the mind can bring about change in the body. So
That it can, which is
your
beyond
your you
known
can make your
science for the
stomach,
time being.
if you get anxious, your stomach starts to turn
Yep.
over. You can actually cause physical harm to your body by your mental state.
Yeah. Stress will kill you faster than smoking? I'm pretty sure that's
Yeah,
true. Stress is
sounds
not good.
good. Sounds good.
Sounds, it must be true.
We'll
It
go with
must
it.
be true.
Yeah.
Wow. So I can say the head of the Atlanta C.S. Lewis Institute. If you become a robot, you keep your soul. Fair? Fair? Maybe too far.
If you become a robot, you'll keep your soul. I don't have to think about that
All
one.
right, all right.
Uh,
He said it. It's true. No more questions. Move on,
hey, I'm
everyone.
denying it. I'm denying. I'm denying
Oh, I'm
anything.
being held hostage. Help!
Uh,
Help!
yeah,
Oh
yeah, that's
man,
right. Yeah, yeah.
awesome.
The
Well,
devil.
Bill, this has been a blast.
Yeah, thanks. Enjoyed it.
Fantastic.
Good to
Well,
see
I
you
hope we can
again.
talk again.
Yeah.
You got the knowledge. You got the goods, and you're very well at articulating it and explaining them in a way
I'm
that
faking it all. I'm
even
just,
I can grasp some of. So,
uh, well, thanks. Good to talk to you,
yeah, you
and
too.
let's stay in touch.
Sounds good. Talk to you later.
Have a good day.
Bye.